Aaron, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
So you're going to be my first guest that's going to walk while he talks. And you know what? I'm the same way. I wish we could be doing this while we're walking outside or on the beach. Best conversations I ever have are not in front of a computer, all focused. So don't worry about it. As soon as you're ready, you just get up and start walking around. Cool?
Perfect. Yeah, like my ideal dinner is sitting at the bar. So the conversation is sort of side by side instead of, you know, intense eye contact is a nice thing, but not necessary, for all good conversations.
Take the formality out,
That's
create the,
exactly right.
create the
Yeah.
ease of the mind.
Yep. Yep.
All right, so I'm going to do a real quick intro so that my audience, either if you've been with me on a journey or you're just tuning in, so you know exactly where we are and what to expect. It's been about a year and 2 months. We're at 72, 73 episodes. We are now in season three, firmly focused on this idea of adopting marketing mindset in the world of HR in the employee experience. In fact, 2 weeks ago, we published a draft of a book that incorporates all of the 70 guests with three other co authors called The Lost Audience. These are the last episodes before we are going to plunge into season four, which is going to be all about running campaigns. We're going to, as a community, support the bold, the courageous innovators, practitioners that are ready to roll up those sleeves and go and campaign away, and then come in and share with us what they've learned. In the meantime, I met Aaron, I think it's been about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and he talked about campaigns. A CMO talking about internal campaigns. Obviously, my antennas went up immediately. And today we're going to talk about what is a perfect campaign to improve remote collaboration. How many of you have talked to me or are discussing the challenges of remote? It sucks. We know it sucks. It's hard. So how do we improve it? And when I say a perfect campaign, obviously Aaron is not going to deliver the perfect campaign. It's going to be awesome and interesting, but we're going to talk about what does it look like to go beyond. So that was a little long. Aaron, thanks for being patient with me. I'm going to throw in a question to you, and then we'll kick this off. I'm always curious about the paradigm shift for marketers, for those, especially the CMOs, applying what they know to the internal audience. So
Mhm.
I would love maybe either how it happened or maybe some weird mental gymnastics that need to take place in order for these muscles to be redirected. Is there a paradigm shift? Give us a little inside view into your brain as you take your focus not away from, but in addition to this
Yeah.
internal audience.
Yeah, that's spot on. So it really is. It's an additional thing, right? Because at the end of the day, we're all driven by metrics and outcomes and results, especially in the modern marketer or the CMO leading a marketing division. And I think we're all in the midst of changing the mindset from marketing being a cost center to this productive place to invest and actually get positive ROI. And so that's the mission we're on. That's the journey that we're going through. And to your point, there is a lost audience, right? And that is your internal people. And I think this doesn't just go for marketing, obviously, but the culture internally is sort of the engine that runs the whole thing. And so it's hard to draw a straight line, right, in this sort of metrics obsessed culture. Which, by the way, I'm a participant, right? I'm an advocate actually. But what I've learned in more recent years as the leader of a department essentially is that even if things aren't precisely quantifiable, doesn't mean they're not worthwhile, right? And we're all obsessed with these mantras like if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, and all these sort of popular euphemisms that basically put data and analytics on this pedestal, and that's great, right? Measurement's great, data analytics amazing, but where does that leave campaigns like we're talking about that don't demonstrate in a more immediate ROI, right? Where's the time? And so that really, I think, was the struggle. I think to your point of paradigm shift, it's baked into us as marketers, right? I think that the only real paradigm shift in my mind is the results aspect, right? Because again, we're in a results obsessed culture and work environment, largely a good thing. But, where does that leave sort of feel good campaigns? Where does that lead, the ability to just build up culture and do something nice? And one of the things we talked about initially was what I call just cause projects, right? You're doing it just cause. And what you're doing should have a positive impact. And that, it feels worthwhile, but you have to sort of disengage that muscle that everything must be results, results, results. And that actually isn't so easy.
I love that, and it's going to be a partially therapeutic episode for me because I'm in a lot of these calls, and I love the distinction. With your permission, I'd like to give us kind of a, two-phased approach, and we're going to call it when we're switching from one to the other. The first, we're going to talk about you've run campaigns, you've learned from them, you did them because, as you said, just because it feels right, it's intuitive, it makes sense. You did them. And then we're going to draw a line in the sand after that and talk about a future state in which it is structured. I'm not saying you're a champion of that, and maybe you would be. And I welcome reverse sides where the therapeutic session begins, where I talk to you and I say, hey, this is what I'm thinking, because if we don't make it structured, it will be difficult to operationalize, scale, and ensure that it's happening in every organization. And we could begin to make arguments around ROI, but that is in phase 2. So if you're cool with it, let's approach it this way.
I'm cool.
All right. So we're going to talk about you running campaigns, which is where my antennas just immediately went up. And as soon as you're ready, you can get up and walk around, as you said before. So just feel free. Aaron, when did it begin? Give us a little bit of a. This is the moment when either you raise your hand, or you were approached as the CMO to get involved in this, typically an HR run initiative. I say typically, a lot of my audience are atypical, but typically would be run under the people operations. And then walk us through, and I'll interrupt with questions. Why'd you do it? How did you do it? How did it go? Let's share with an audience one of the first campaigns that we've covered on this podcast.
Yeah. So it came about the specific campaign that I wanted to share, which we call the Quantic Towel Challenge, and we'll get into sort of what that looked like and what that meant, or the Q Towel Challenge, is the outcome of one of our marketing on-sites. So like you mentioned before, this whole remote work culture is a real challenge. And I think really out of the gate, an important step is to acknowledge the trade-off. Right? Because I think that there is this, you talk about lines in the sand. There is this line in the sand, and there are people that are vehemently opposed to remote, right? Like Goldman is like the loudest. And by the way, there's real reasons behind that. Everything they do is financially motivated, right? Commercial real estate. But we won't get into that. But anyway, so you've got these players, these large companies or organizations that are just loud about, let's get back to the office and be grown-ups. And it's a little condescending, right? Like I never cared for that approach to it. But then there are, remote for lifers. And there's got to be a middle ground. I think we're all trying to figure out what hybrid looks like. So it's just interesting to see this all play out. But, as my CEO used to say, the toothpaste is out of the tube. Right. So early days COVID, we went remote. We've got employees in over 30 states. The toothpaste is out of the tube. There's no going back, essentially. Mm-hmm. So we need to figure this out. So for my group, what we do is we get together 2 to 3 times a year in our office in New York City, and we hang out. And the cool part about that is that, and this, again, nothing groundbreaking. I think most companies are figuring out some version of this. But, it's hard and expensive to get a whole company together. So my department, I've made it a priority for us to get together and spend time together with the primary purpose being bonding, hanging out, right? The primary purpose is not work sessions. And we do that, right? We do, workshops, and we meet for a majority of the time and discuss real things and goals and, quarter ahead type planning, but it's not primarily about that. Primarily, it's about the activities that we do, the dinners that we go out to, the time we spend together. So I set that as a backdrop to sort of how this specific campaign came about, because we were at the end of a pretty intense work session where we identified the critical campaigns that we wanted to run for the quarter ahead and the KPIs, and like we really were sort of knee deep in planning, um, and and I wanted to just sort of step back and zoom out. And part of my job these days is less zooming in and more zooming out, which I'm enjoying more and more. I know that sort of sounds fluffy because like, what does zooming out mean? But for me, it was like, let's unstick ourselves from, campaigns and KPIs and, delivering results. And let's talk about like cool stuff that we could do. And so we just started to whiteboard, random ideas. One of which was, uh, this was not my idea. I've helped facilitate it, but
Hmm.
I have people that are smarter than me working for me, which is a secret to my success. Um, and so my VP of marketing is a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. He grew up in the Pittsburgh area. And if you're a football fan, you know that they have their towels is a big part of like their games and kind of like their football culture. They call them the terrible towels. And so he wanted to apply that here because we're all dispersed and all over the place. What can we do to sort of put something, put the same thing in everyone's hands, literally, right? Like, so we came up with this idea of the Quantic towel, this white towel with an orange Q. Orange is our, uh, branded color, and we send them to everybody in the company. And we encourage everyone to take pictures, in their hometown to a place that's of some personal significance. And those are kind of the guidelines, right? Really, it's up to you. And so we did this, and we had a really good participation rate. Everyone sort of submitted their pictures from all over the country in all these interesting places. And typically, they weren't like, um, I don't know, Mount Rushmore, right? Like they were these interesting personal places that were in, people's towns and cities, obviously. So yeah, that's essentially what we did, and kind of how we arrived at that idea.
You showed me a couple of pictures on that, or maybe I looked at it on your website. Wow,
Hmm.
that looks so cool. You gotta have a couple stories. A couple stories, maybe an obvious one where it's like, yeah, I expected for this to happen. Maybe a story where it happened, you got a picture, and you couldn't believe it.
Yeah. Yeah, there were a few pictures that came in. Well, it's interesting because, like, not that anyone sent in anything inappropriate, but when you're thinking about trying to use some of this content to demonstrate our culture. So that the cool part about this, and I think this was one of the primary reasons it worked, was that we didn't do this with the explicit um, idea to you know use these pictures on our about us page, for example. But we ended up using it because they were really good, and we were redoing our parts of the website, and we just sort of fell on this idea to put in this rotating slide essentially in about us, to like one of our main sort of drivers as a group is show don't tell, right? Like don't say we're cool, we're honest, we're helpful, right? Like show it, demonstrate it. And so this was a really really helpful and human way to do that. And so yeah, and when we sort of rolled this out on the all company meeting, there was this really big moment where the chat sort of blew up. People were so excited to see themselves and their coworkers and their friends, on our website. There were thousands and thousands of people go, and there they were in their hometown, holding up a towel next, with their coworkers in the slide afterwards. So it was sort of organic. It um, felt like people enjoyed it. I think at the end of the day, like there's an element of fun, which is really hard to pull off. I think that's sort of the last point I have here, is that like, the initial sort of way that we compensated for remote were these mandatory happy hours.
Hmm.
And I think the first couple were enjoyable, but then basically they became sort of this thing that you had to do and just stare at a screen longer at the end of the day. And nobody likes that. Like the
No,
reality is nobody really likes that.
no.
um, it's not the same, right? Like me and you having a drink together at a nice bar or restaurant is fundamentally different than Zoom. Um, so anyway,
I want to go to the town hall meeting and I hear you loud and clear. This wasn't a, hey, we're going to do a website. Why don't you all send us very fun picture? No, that wasn't like that. I
Yeah.
hear you.
Yeah.
And let's look at it as a spectrum. On one hand side, there's this formality that as soon as we hear it, and as soon as people in the organization hear it, they check out. In the between, there's this voluntold, like, yeah. You don't have to, but we're watching if you do it. And all the way in the other is a totally organic thing that absolutely just happens. So my question is, when you positioned it, was there like, hey, this is the meaning, hey, this is a way to bring us to, what was the, like, if you were to distill the sentiment that was used to activate this campaign, what would it sound like?
I think I'm not sure I would use this word, but it would describe the feeling, and the feeling is, I think, pride.
Hmm.
And I think that it's really hard to generate, pride in the workplace when you're remote, right?
Yeah.
Like, because when you walk down, a really nice office, and everyone's sort of, dressed up and cordial, like there's a feeling to a nice work environment. Now, is it worth that versus us being flexible and remote? I don't know, right? Um, but but how do you generate that feeling of pride in where you work? And so I think this did that. We sort of a little bit on the nose, right? Like it's sort of we made our own little flag, right, and had people wave it around. but but yeah, I think at the end of the day, that it really is. It's a feeling, and that goes into the bucket of sometimes things that are less measurable. I'm not going to say immeasurable, but how do you measure a feeling? I mean, there's lots of pseudoscientific ways to do that. I think the marketing industry on the edge of it is some of these measurement companies that are effectively trying to measure feelings or sentiment in the parlance of marketing. But yeah, I think like we looked around the room, quote unquote, right, and everyone celebrated and felt good, and it was a moment for us, and we sort of hooked it into. We brought in Motivosity, or HR rather. Really, HR was a key partner in executing this and some of the other stuff that we do in partnership with them. But a platform that they brought in to Quantic last year is called Motivosity, and it's just a space for us to basically give thanks and sort of be together in a kind of a town square type, digital space. So we tie that into the campaign and stuff like that. But it really gave a burst of energy. Now energy always runs out, so I don't think that can like a campaign like that can't fuel a culture in perpetuity, but it can give you this jolt, this boost, and I think that's important.
And if we think about the journey of customers, there's no single campaign, and that's it. There's a Super Bowl, and then there's a 3 months after. There's this campaign. There's a values campaign by the organization. Maybe there's a campaign about promotions and the value. Maybe there's a campaign about the manufacturing. All of this is a way for you to meet your prospects, your customers, where they are continuously. And what you just did is a campaign, and it sounds like you, my words, kind of stumbled into it based on your intuition. And in a way, when you and I connected a few weeks ago, when I heard it, I was like, well, you are in a way stumbling into the emerging market, in my view, which is going to take what you've done and now going to elevate it further and further and further. Because ultimately, I'd be curious one day to start thinking about how many Q towels and pictures were out there, and then that is one signal of the retention in the organization and performance in the organization.
Sure. Yeah. Um, and before retention comes engagement, really. And engagement's a more, and you and I talked about sort of, lagging versus leading indicators. And retention, and also at the end of the day, why did you lose someone or a group of people? Like human psychology is complex, right? And for us to try and simplify it, we kind of have to because we need to, take meaning from things. And that's not a bad thing, but it's often misinterpreted. And this goes back to like, great, we're all data driven, but it's complicated. And so extracting meaning from data, uh, it isn't as straightforward as I think we all kind of assumed when we became data obsessed 10, 15 years ago as a culture. So
So here, I think if you're cool with it, and I think your audience see why Aaron is here, like this is an awesome campaign. And by the way, like if you want to learn more, just reach out, like ask questions on the YouTube channel or wherever whatever platform you're watching it on. I think it'd be really cool. But let me challenge that sentiment as we move our way into phase two of our conversation. And I'm going to, first of all, totally agree with you. It's not all about data. But I will argue that without data, getting budgets and resources will be mighty challenging. Mighty challenging. So
yeah,
if we were to lean into it, I picture a world that I'd like you to stress test or help me add to, and we build together. Because we're parting reality right now. Reality is really kind of, we're done with reality at the moment. A new world in which you run campaigns like that and you say, okay, impressions. How many people saw it? How many times? Click-through rates. A conversion is a submission of a picture, perhaps. Perhaps there's another way to think about this campaign. And then we have campaign after campaign after campaign. And I'll give one more thought to make this a little more complicated, then turn it over to you, and then we'll see where our conversation leads, because I've got no focus of where this goes. I'm swimming in this. We then start to think about funnels, because that is a foundational concept, campaign and funnels in the world of marketing. Why? Is because you have a destination. So one is this type of a campaign with towels, cute towels. The second could be learning and development. The third could be onboarding. Then there's wellness. Then there's benefits. And now you're curating a world where there are leading indicators and engagement with campaigns across all of these funnels that can now begin to map to, you said it perfectly, engagement, which will lead to performance, which will lead to retention. Powering down, turning it over to you.
yeah, yeah. So so how do you get budget, right? I think it's at the end of the day, right? Like it's great. So we acknowledge that there are some things that are not perfectly measurable. There's some things that are intuitive and feel good, but like businesses are dependent on profitability, and in order to spend money, you need to demonstrate you can get an ROI, positive ROI, obviously. So I can share what's worked for me, and what's worked for me, and I borrowed this from how I run acquisition marketing, right? And so you have to separate things out, because you cannot, a conversion is this nebulous thing, right? Like you said, it's typically referred to as some sort of form submission online, but it's anything. Like we just converted on this phone call, right? Like that's a conversion. Like we intended to do that and we did that. Now conversion, right? So no conversion is equal. Like even, and then if you even take those calculated metrics like CPA, we all define CPA differently, right? Like we have this cost per funded loan, golden metric, but like even the way we calculate that is fundamentally different than some cost per lead or cost per qualified lead. So it's all splitting hairs in terms of metrics, right? And by the way, if you're skilled, you can make almost anything look good by leaving things out and emphasizing what works, right? So, and unfortunately, I think we're all playing that game to some degree. But what has worked for me in the past is separating things out and not holding things accountable to the same ultimate metric, right? And so there's this, separation. I think most brands do this today, where you separate out, performance or acquisition from brand, right? And brand is obviously much more about, like you said, impressions and awareness, and you judge things based off of that versus the more sort of conversion and performance oriented type campaigns that you run mid or lower funnel, right? I think that's just a general approach. So, but the philosophy is that you break things apart, you split things out, and you judge them differently. I think philosophically, I call it functionalism. So I'm a functionalist, which means that I judge things based on their intended purpose, right? So, and it sounds nice, but it's not overly sophisticated, right? So if you are, running a search campaign, which is very sort of, demand generation oriented, and really kind of close to lower funnel because you have people actively searching for something that you're there for. That's why Google is Google, right? And all advertising dollars eventually flow there, is because it's so bottom funnel at the end of the day compared to any sort of display or connected TV or more upper funnel stuff. So I sort of bring that up just to sort of offer up the idea of breaking things apart and putting things in buckets. And so you got to do that here, right? Now, the key is that any bucket, any budgeting sort of bucket that you create ultimately does have to have metrics tied to it. To your point. So what are those, right? So what I've done is I've broken off parts of my budget into pieces that are extremely they're tied very closely to real performance metrics, right? And we're serious about it, by the way. I know I'm sort of giving data analytics and metrics a hard time, but that's because I lived and died by them, and I so over-indexed on performance and metrics for so long. And I've recently kind of had more of a revelation about there are things we do not see, right? And there's humility to admitting that and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, so judging things differently is crucial, and creating separation in budget is key. And that's how we do it, right? So, and we'll partner up with different departments to activate different types of campaigns. I'm always happy, we're running a campaign with IT right now. And I'm use our marketing budget, right? Because we have things broken out. We'll pick metrics, we'll agree upon the metrics. It'll be less, less ROI based and more sort of impression awareness based. But yeah, so separating things out has really worked for me.
It was amazing how you continue to reference external thinking and bringing it internal, which is why adoption of marketing, those words, adoption of marketing mindset is key here. And you've got IT that's talking to you about campaigns. So correct me if I'm wrong, but if campaigns work with internal audiences, and actually I'm going to go on the limb, and they can't not work because they work with customers. In fact, what is a campaign? It's really the intention of meeting people where they are to guide them toward a journey, right? And then maybe along that journey create sub-journeys because not all people are the same. So really that is the campaign. So if IT says we would like to improve on cyber security, and a lot of that is very simple things we'd like people to do. If a benefits folks at HR say, listen, we really need them to pick a dependent. We need them to do this at a certain point of the year. If your L&D folks say, listen, we'd like to get more people to get into our management program and apply or take a course, how is it that we are not, or maybe how would we get to a point where we're nonstop running campaigns? And if we get there, does that live in marketing? Or does this function move into people operations world? What do you think?
My approach is I always offer up, we'll lead it, right? It'll come from our budget and we'll lead it. And that really is kind of just a general mentality of, offer help. It'll come back to you in spades is obviously the idea. We'll take that on. I think that we all know departments or groups of people that generally say, yeah, sorry, we're just super busy.
Totally.
Or, oh yeah, no, we'll take that on. And that doesn't mean my group isn't busy. It's just it's important to me. It's important to us that we're the type of people that can do many things at once, right? And we generally say, yeah, I can handle that. We can get that done. And to me, that's what separates, I think, a great group from a mediocre group. So I think generally speaking, we offer up to lead it. Now, the key is, and this is going to, there's a little bit of, politics here, right? And I'm just sort of sharing what's worked for me.
You're
but
being,
in terms
you're
of
being real, Aaron. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, so who announced this? at the all company meeting, going back to this Q Towel campaign that we
Yeah.
ran for, it was like a 6-week campaign internally for, hundreds and hundreds of employees. I didn't announce it. In fact, I don't think marketing was mentioned. And I don't care, but like to my group, we celebrated it, right? Because it was our idea, and we helped, execute design. HR did a lot of the legwork, right? And you know what? It was an HR campaign, so I didn't announce it or share this with the company. The head of HR did, and so yeah, I think on the other side of that coin is credit. So upfront, raise your hand and say, yeah, I think we could handle that. And then at the end, don't care about credit flowing your way, because I guarantee you that just bona fides marketing my department's reputation as a kick-ass group, right? And I think it's kind of goes with the whole theme. Like, it's not necessarily unnoticed or unsaid. It's just it's a really powerful way, I think, to build capital within an organization. It's, again, just sharing what's worked for me.
That's awesome. So all of you CMOs listening to this could be an interesting opportunity for you to partner and begin to create value for others internally, other leaders. And the following train of thought there, for marketers, it's probably already self-evident. For some of those who are not exposed to marketing, why do we keep talking about the campaign? Campaigns are foundational to the world of marketing. And Aaron, I want to just, you and I, really briefly, I'm actually pulling up here. I found a couple quotes. Actually, my favorite quotes about campaigns is marketing without campaigns is like a ship without sail. Like quite literally, that is the foundational tool. So when we think about a campaign, Aaron, in broad strokes, I think about it as there's a beginning, there's an end, there's an audience, we're segmenting the audience, there are creatives, there are channels. Where do we reach them, especially with this type of an internal audience? So what in the biggest buckets, when you talk about a campaign, when you think about a campaign, how do you think about it? And then maybe let's you and I reflect on what's different between an external audience and internal audience when we think about a campaign.
Yeah, I think that you're spot on, right? The definition of a campaign are all those things, right? Beginning and an end, audience, and these would all be summarized in something like a campaign brief, where there's spend and there's channels, and that's what marketing looks like. So I think it depends on the size, right? Because there are big campaigns and small campaigns. Some marketing campaigns are heavily researched, and a lot goes in. I want to sort of drill into that audience component. And so a lot of work can be spent, and often is spent, developing that audience. And there's quantitative and qualitative approaches, right? So like, for example, I'll just try and make it real with a real example. We went to market, or actually, I'll use a real-time example that we're in the process of doing. A little over a year ago, we released what we call the pay ring. It is a wearable device that you wear on your finger. It's a ring, and it's a substitute for a debit card. It's super cool, right? So if you wave your ring over, a payment device, boom, you pay. It's got the same technology inside of a ceramic ring as the chip that's in your plastic card. And so like we partnered up with this company that actually produced them, and we brought them to market here in the US, and it's just a super cool concept. And I love taking something that's assumed to be the way it is and asking the basic question of why. Like, why do we have to pay through a plastic card? Like, it doesn't, like, if you step back and think about it, that's not, doesn't make sense. Like, it's not a necessary thing. It's just the way that we do it and the way that it's developed. So we brought the ring to market as a product. Now, a ring needs to be tied to a checking account. So we launched a pretty big campaign, mostly in digital, across like social channels, influencer videos, and we learned a lot pretty fast, actually. But one thing that we didn't do was spend a lot of time researching the audience. Because I've seen and been a part of marketing teams that really spin their wheels for months and months and months. And research is not a bad thing. There needs to be some research to point you in a direction at the end of the day. But like, you know, creating, personas, like 5 different personas, like, Savvy Sally and Frugal Frank. Those are kind of constructs that marketers do to kind of make themselves feel good and give themselves a direction. But again, something like that is necessary, and so yeah, developing an audience is a really big part of a campaign. And going back to the HR example and sort of promoting and running a campaign internally for your people, you skip that whole part, or at least you should, because you got to know who you are, I think, and like you said, meet people where they are, which is the cool part, actually. I think because, again, marketers spend so much time researching and trying to understand their audience. You should be able to more or less skip that, which is really cool, which is why this is a really good thing to sort of bring your intuition to, right? Because if you know who you are and you know your people, right, and there's a general sort of sense of that, then you could feel your way to a good idea, which is really, really, really hard to do in the real world when you're activating a campaign like us bringing to market the Quantic Pay Ring, which was hard to do. Initially, we thought we were like, marketing to technologists and like outdoorsy people. Well, that wasn't really the case. And so it was important that we didn't dump hundreds of thousands of dollars in research building up those strawman personas, because they weren't really our audience. So that's just an example to try and illustrate that a bit.
Right on. I'm with you. And you're right. This is an audience that you know a lot about. So that is one difference. What are some of the other differences that you think when we're applying this campaign thinking internally? There's one thing that comes to my mind, that many, but there's one big one. Is curious your take on the idea that there's the audience and then there's the manager of that audience, which is 70% of the variance in employee experience is the manager. Do you create another campaign to think about how to activate managers to show up in that employee experience the way that's intended? So if you're doing the Q-Tile campaign, what if the managers brought that up? What if you were able to get them to be excited and to talk about it with their teams? Would that increase engagement in that specific example? Whether that one or others, what are the differences between the campaigns externally and internally that you could think of?
It's really interesting because I'm just trying to share what I've learned, and with these sorts of campaigns, right? When it comes to internal culture, bottom up, not top down, right? So what you're describing is, coordinating with middle management and motivating them to sort of trickle down and share with their individual people. Here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it. Like, nope, bottom up, right? It's got to be more grassroots. It's got to be, and that's a really good indicator, actually. I know we're talking about metrics and KPIs, but like, don't forget the I, right? KPI. Like, at the end of the day, you're looking for strong, clear indicators of success. Mm-hmm. And if there is just this natural adoption of what you're trying to roll out for employees, that's a really good indicator that it's working. And if you are, kind of like calling a meeting with managers and like, we really need you to motivate your people to like, engage with this. Well, that's a really good indicator that what you're doing probably isn't a great idea.
Roger that. And when you think about, Aaron, this maybe utopian state, like when I think about what are we trying to accomplish with the customer experience from a marketing perspective, I think it should be the focus on all touch points are, right message, right person, right time, right channel. We really are meeting them where they are at every touch point. Would that be an impossible goal to set internally, that we do the same? That marketing mindset is now being adapted in order to accomplish the same thing. So whenever you see any interaction, any touch point from your organization, it is relevant to you and the organization stop being, these are my word, not yours, but being one of the biggest spammers in the life of the employee, because there's just so much communication. So what do you think would be a North Star if we had to give it some shape here?
Yeah, North Stars are super helpful. So I do think actually I'll go back to that sort of marketing truth, right? The paradigm of, right place, right time, right message, right? And that, you know, that is really more of an ideal.
Hmm.
The truth is, like, what's a recent thing that you bought?
Amazon?
Okay. Well, Amazon's interesting because it's such an established marketplace that you just sort of automatically go there. Did you buy anything like from a website, direct to consumer, in the past few weeks or few months that comes to mind?
Shoes for my kids. I think it was a pair of Adidas.
Okay. Was it from Adidas.com?
Yes.
Did you go there just once and pull the trigger, or was it more of multi-touch?
I think it was a multi-touch. I think I went and then I thought about it. Then maybe there was a retargeting involved, and I was like, "Yeah, we're gonna finally do this." So this was a journey.
Beautiful. We should share this with Adidas because that's their that would make them feel good. But yeah, so that's a really good sort of real example of customer journey. Now, like at every quote unquote touch point, was it perfect? Like it can't be. So, but I do think it's really important that it's an objective, right? It is the goal for marketing overall to be there, right? To be there with the right message at the right time, at the right place. The reality is that almost never happens, right? And that's okay. But I do think that just sort of acknowledging that even with the customer journey, that rarely happens. I think with the employee journey, it's probably the same, right? Like, but I think it has to be paired with the culture. So in terms of like, let's say that you have a spectrum, right? Like a meter, and on the left is like barely ever communicates, right? Like, so the organization with top down, side to side, like barely ever communicates, and on the right side of the meter is like, you know, over communication to the nth degree, where everything is shared and discussed and posted and blah blah blah. Um, like, know thyself, right? Like, so what type of organization are you? Where do you sort of live on that meter? And I think it should be, you end up with the people you end up with, and what I've learned is that when you recruit, right, you're sort of building your own internal culture, maybe within a specific team even, and like that group begins to bring in people that are kind of like that group, hopefully complementary. I'm not talking about like diversity stuff, but really like from an attitude, or just general philosophy, right? So like, we're driven, we're open, we're humble, we communicate effectively. Like, if you have done your job from a people standpoint, it should be pretty clear sort of where you live on that meter, and then you got to check on that, right? And occasionally say, hey, are there things you guys want to hear more about or less about? I think that's kind of like the temperature check that you need to do occasionally. But if you know the type of organization you are, I think the easier it is to answer that communication question.
Understood. And the temperature check is so important. And then that kind of leads me, I'm looking at time and I can't believe that we're toward the end of the episode. I could do this all day, Aaron. I got so many more questions. But, and maybe you'll go toward listening and how important it is. But if you were to give, one piece of advice for those that are listening who are on this journey to bring marketing mindset internally, what advice what advice would you give them?
I would say, really, it's just about like picking your spot and being patient, right? So if you come in with the objective of like, I want to be the hero of the organization and run a great culture campaign and make myself and my group look great, it's probably not going to work out. And other departments in the organization overall can sort of sniff it out too. So I do think that if you come at it from more of a, I'm a member of this organization, right, this business, and I care about our culture, and if you sort of have that mindset, um, you can, over time develop ideas that you feel like are worthwhile activating, offer to help, and don't try and take the credit, right? And I think that is a recipe that, again, has just really worked well for me. And like, I haven't thought about an HR or people type campaign in a while, and that's okay. But occasionally, I think back to that sort of temperature check mentality, occasionally you should be thinking about that, right? So our next onsite as a group is in 3 weeks. We'll all be together in Midtown, and I don't have it on the schedule, but I have it sort of earmarked in my head. We're gonna chat about culture real fast, and either something we feel is worthwhile will come out of it, or not, right? And I think that goes back to like picking your spot. I think it's about sort of mentality. It's got to be helpful. It's got to be genuine, and yeah, that's what's worked for me.
Create the space. Listen, Aaron,
Yes.
I'm just, I really appreciate you're the first, or one of the first, I believe the first campaign conversation that we've had as we really begin the journey of focusing on campaigns. So for all of you listening, subscribe. Let me know what you think about this episode. Ask Aaron questions if you want to know more about Q Towels. I'm going to ask him for a few pictures, maybe grab them from the website so that I can share with you all. And on to preparation for season 4. Next up will be one of the leaders at Blue Origin, where we're going to talk about the convergence, where one team is responsible for all audiences, internal and external. On that note, Aaron, just want to say a huge thank you for your time and for your brilliance.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been fun.
Awesome. Over and out.